The photograph hung quietly on the wall, half swallowed by the shadows of the room. A thin layer of dust rested upon the glass, not thick enough to hide her face, but enough to show how long it had been since anyone truly cared to look. It was his grandmother's picture. Her eyes, still alive in that faded frame, carried a softness that words could never catch, like an old melody that lingers in memory long after the song is over. Her smile, oh, that smile, it wasn't made for the camera. It was born of sacrifice, stitched together with prayers, whispered through sleepless nights. Hamza would glance at the photo sometimes when he passed by. Not out of love, but habit, the way one looks at an old wall clock that no longer ticks. To him, she was history. A chapter of his life that had ended long ago, folded neatly between the pages of childhood. But to her, that photograph had been everything. It had captured the day she believed her prayers had finally worked. That was the day her grandson had worn his first school uniform, the day she thought she could finally rest her trembling hands. She had smiled because she thought she had done enough. She had no idea how many nights still waited for her. Nights where her tears would soak the pillow her arthritic hands had stitched. Years drifted like dust motes through sunlight. Hamza grew, learned, earned, and forgot. He forgot the warmth of her wrinkled palms pressed against his forehead when he had fever. He forgot the sound of her coughing quietly at night so as not to wake him. He forgot how she would skip her meal when there wasn't enough for both. Now he lived in a world of deadlines and phone screens. A world too bright for memories, too loud for silence. And yet, every morning when sunlight slipped through the curtains, it always touched that photograph first. As if the universe still remembered her, even if her grandson did not. One afternoon, while cleaning the room, Hamza noticed something strange. The bottom edge of the frame had loosened slightly, and from the gap peeked a corner of yellowed paper. He almost pulled it out, but the phone rang. Work, life, and the moment was gone. That night, he dreamed of her. She sat on the old wooden chair, her shawl around her shoulders, the same faint smile curving her lips. But her eyes were wet. She didn't speak much in the dream. She only said one thing. Sometimes, child, love hides behind the things we never bother to turn over. When he woke, the room was silent. So silent he could hear the clock breathing, and in that silence, the photograph seemed alive again. He could feel her presence in the still air. The scent of her rose-scented oil faintly lingering as if time had bent for a moment. He sat there, staring at the picture. A feeling rising in his chest that he couldn't name. A mixture of guilt, tenderness, and something that felt like loss rediscovered. He didn't know yet. But that small folded paper behind the frame. Morning came. Like a whisper of forgiveness. Pale light stretching, its fingers across the walls, brushing against that old photograph once more. The dust had settled unevenly, as if even silence wanted to remember her face. Hamza stood before it, half awake, his mind still tangled between the fading dream and the heavy quiet of dawn. He didn't understand why his heart felt so strange that morning, a slow, dull ache, like nostalgia without memory. Something about that dream. Her voice, her eyes, it refused to fade. He reached for the photograph. The frame was lighter than he remembered, trembling slightly in his hands as though it, too, had waited too long to be touched. He laid it on the table. His fingers hesitated above the wood, unsure, like a man about to open an old wound. The sunlight fell directly on the corner where the paper peeked out, a thin curl of yellow that seemed to breathe with the morning air. He pulled it gently. The frame resisted for a second, and then gave way with a tired sigh. A small piece of folded paper slipped free, as fragile as a dried petal, its edges frayed, its surface spotted with age. The handwriting, though faint, was unmistakable. Slanted, careful, written with the trembling elegance of a woman who had loved too much and suffered too quietly. His throat tightened. He could almost smell her old ink pen, the kind she kept in that wooden box beside her prayer beads. He unfolded the paper. It crackled like brittle leaves, and the first line caught his breath. If someday you forget me, my child, then may God let you find me in your heart again. He froze. The words seemed to echo inside the room, touching the air, the walls, everything. It wasn't a letter, it was a voice, trapped in paper. He could hear her in it. The pauses, the softness, the quiet faith that had once carried his childhood through storms. Below that line, her words continued. When you were small, you slept holding my finger. I used to think one day you'll walk on your own. And I will watch from the doorway, proud and full of prayers. I didn't know that one day you would walk so far, that even my voice couldn't follow. His eyes burned. He blinked hard, but the tears came anyway. The words swam in his vision, turning the page into a blur of ink and memory. He sat down. The chair creaked beneath his weight, and for the first time in years, the room felt alive. The ticking clock seemed slower, softer, as if time itself bowed in respect to the memory of the woman who once filled this house with prayer. He read the letter again and again. Each line carried a heartbeat of its own. If ever life makes you proud, don't forget someone once bent her pride to raise you. And if ever you feel alone, remember, I never left. I am still here, behind this photograph, behind every breath you take. By the time he reached the last word, his tears had already fallen on the paper, dark circles spreading like rain on the soil that longed for life. Hamza pressed the note to his chest. And in that fragile silence, it felt as if the photograph on the wall smiled again. Not because she was seen, but because she was remembered. Outside, the morning deepened into gold. Somewhere, unseen, a sparrow sang. And Hamza, for the first time in years, whispered her name, not as a memory, but as a prayer. The letter stayed pressed against his chest long after the words had sunk into him like rain into dry earth. The room was quiet, too quiet, the kind of silence that grows heavy when the past begins to speak. Hamza leaned back in his chair, the paper still trembling in his hand. His eyes wandered to the photograph again. And suddenly it was no longer just a picture on a wall. It was a doorway. And behind it, time began to move backward. He could see her again. Not as the still face in the frame, but as she truly was. Wrapped in her old shawl, sitting by the window, her hands busy mending a tear in his school shirt. Her eyes were tired, but her smile never faltered. Every stitch was a prayer. Every sigh a promise. May my child never know the kind of loneliness I have lived with. But he had forgotten. He had forgotten all of it. The guilt began to ache in him like an old wound reopening. He remembered the last few months of her life. How the city had swallowed him whole. Work, friends, deadlines, and phone calls he meant to return, but never did. He could still recall that one missed call. The one he ignored because he was in a meeting. When he checked later, it only said, Dottie, one missed call. He had smiled faintly back then, thinking, I'll call her tonight. But night turned into days. And days into regret. When the news came that she was gone, he didn't cry, not at first. He stood still, staring at the phone screen, as if the words were written in some other language. It wasn't real, he told himself. It couldn't be. At the funeral, he had touched her forehead, cold, still, light as air. And for the first time, he realized how many goodbyes he had missed while chasing the wrong tomorrows. He had tried to speak that day, to say I'm sorry, but his voice broke into silence. And now, years later, that silence was back. Sitting in the same room with him, breathing beside him, whispering in the corners like an echo that refused to fade. The one she used to water every morning, even when her hands shook so badly that most of the water would fall on her feet. He remembered laughing once, telling her the tree didn't need so much care. She had smiled then and said softly, maybe it doesn't, but I do. The memory hit him like a wave. He pressed his forehead against the glass, eyes burning. heart unraveling. If only he could turn back time to one single evening when she waited with food on the table, the clock ticking slow, the prayer mat still warm from her knees. If only he could have just sat with her, listened to her stories one more time, instead of running after moments that never stayed. Behind him, the photograph caught the dim evening light. Her smile seemed different now, not happy, not sad, just knowing, as if she could see through him even now. Hamza turned back toward the picture, his voice shaking as he whispered, "I remember now, Dottie, I remember." The next morning, Hamza woke with the taste of salt still on his lips, the quiet trace of tears that had dried before dawn. Sleep had not come easy. Each time he closed his eyes, he saw her sitting by that old window again, the soft clinking of her bangles echoing faintly like wind chimes from another life. He couldn't stay in that apartment any longer. Something inside him whispered, "Go home." Not the place where he lived now, but the place where love once lived. The small, fading house on the edge of the old neighborhood, where his childhood still waited among the shadows of forgotten afternoons. By noon, he stood outside the gate. The iron was rusted, the hinges weary, but the scent of the earth was the same, a blend of dust, neem, and old memories. The key slipped easily into the lock, as if even the door had been waiting. When he stepped inside, the silence was not empty, it was alive. The house breathed in its own rhythm, every corner humming faintly with the echo of her prayers. Cobwebs hung like thin veils of time, and sunlight spilled through the broken blinds in golden ribbons. He walked slowly, afraid that even his footsteps might disturb her ghost. Her room was just as he remembered. The wooden bed stood against the wall, a folded shawl still lying at the corner, its edges worn and soft from years of warmth. Beside it, her old metal trunk sat locked, the same trunk she used to keep everything precious in: letters, medicines, prayer beads, and memories too heavy for words. Hamza knelt before it, his fingers tracing the cool iron surface. He could almost hear her voice. "Careful, Beta, this lock is older than you." The key was still hanging from the nail beside the mirror. He turned it gently, and the trunk creaked open with a sigh that sounded like relief. Inside, everything was neatly arranged, as if she had known he would come one day. A small pile of folded clothes, a pair of glasses wrapped in tissue, a notebook with the corner torn, and tucked beneath it, a rosary, its beads smooth from years of prayer. He picked up the notebook. The first page had her handwriting, a list of groceries, half in Urdu, half in memory. On the second page, a few lines written shakily, as if her hand had trembled while writing. "Hamza did not come today. Maybe he is busy. I must not complain. Love does not demand it waits." The words struck him like thunder in the quiet room. He turned the page. Another entry, greater than he called last week. His voice sounded tired. "I wanted to tell him about the pain in my knees, but I did not." Why add weight to his young shoulders? Tears welled in his eyes. Each line felt like a confession, a story she had kept hidden not to hurt him. She had suffered in silence, not because she was weak, but because her love had no room for self-pity. As he read on, the pages grew softer, emptier, and near the end of the notebook, he found one last entry, dated just 2 days before her death. "If he ever returns, tell him I forgave him long before he knew he needed forgiveness." Hamza's breath broke. The notebook fell from his trembling hands. He looked around the room, and for the first time, it didn't feel abandoned. It felt sacred, like a place still breathing with prayer. He sat on her bed, the same spot where she had once sat mending his uniform, and whispered into the still air, "I came back, Dottie. I came back." Outside, the wind rose gently, stirring the curtains, and for one fleeting second, the air carried the faint fragrance of her rose oil, the same scent she used every Friday morning, and he knew she had been waiting. The evening light slanted through the window, casting long golden lines across the floorboards. Dust floated in the air like tiny souls, drifting without destination. Hamza sat still on the bed, the notebook resting on his lap, its open pages breathing softly in the wind, each word an echo of her patience. He read the entries again, slower this time, as if each sentence were a heartbeat that had stopped years ago. And for the first time, he began to see what he had never seen before. That silence, too, was a language, and she had spoken it fluently. She had never told him of her pain. Not of her knees that ached when the weather turned cold. Not of the nights when the power went out, and she sat in darkness with her rosary, whispering his name between the beads. She never spoke of hunger, of how she sometimes skipped her meal, because she wanted to save the last piece of bread for him, should he ever return unannounced. Hamza closed his eyes. The room filled with her absence, a thick, almost tangible ache. He could almost hear her voice, the faint tremor in it when she used to say, "Beta, kana." Back then, he would nod without looking up from his phone. Now, that same voice haunted him like a lullaby left unfinished. He rose and walked to the small shelf by her bed. There were her prayer beads, a cracked mirror, and a tiny metal tin that once held sweets for him. He opened it. Inside were 3 sugar cubes, wrapped in old paper. She had saved them, as if she believed he might suddenly appear at the door, asking Dadi Kuchmitha hi. The thought broke him. He sat on the floor, back against the wall, and let his tears fall freely. No longer ashamed, no longer holding them back. He had always thought love meant grand gestures, expensive gifts, big words, shining promises. But here, in this quiet room, he understood the truth. Love was in her waiting, in her cooking alone, in her not complaining, in her choosing silence over self-pity. She had carried her loneliness like prayer beads, counting each day not by pain, but by the hope that maybe, just maybe, he would remember her. Outside, the call for evening prayer drifted through the air, soft, trembling, eternal. The sound filled the room, and Hamza felt something inside him bow. Not out of duty, but out of grief. He placed the notebook back into the trunk carefully, as if returning her heart to rest. And as he closed the lid, a small folded envelope slipped out from beneath the clothes. It was sealed, his name written on it in her familiar handwriting. He froze, his heart thudding like a drum in the quiet. The envelope was thin, almost weightless, but it carried the gravity of everything unsaid. He held it to his chest and whispered, "Even in death, you still speak to me." The wind stirred again, lifting the edge of the curtain, and sunlight kissed the paper in his hand. It was as if the universe itself wanted him to open it, to read the words that had waited longer than love should ever wait. He hesitated. Part of him was afraid of what the letter might reveal, afraid of the truth he already knew deep down. Her silence had been love. But what if, beneath that silence, was forgiveness he did not deserve? He took a deep breath, the kind you take before stepping into memory, and broke the seal. The night was wrapped in silence, thick as sorrow. Outside, the moon hung pale and distant, like a fading memory refusing to die. Inside the dimly lit room, Ali sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the old photograph again, the one of his grandmother, smiling with that same quiet grace he had once taken for granted. He had placed the photo on his desk, facing the window, as if to let her see the moon she had loved so much. The folded paper with her trembling handwriting, "Love is not returned in words, but in remembrance," lay beside it. For the first time in his life, Ali felt the depth of silence. It wasn't the absence of sound, it was the absence of her. Every corner of the house whispered her memory. The wooden chair that creaked, in the corner where she used to sit with her prayer beads, the faint scent of rosewater that lingered in the air, the echo of her soft cough at midnight, all of it haunted him gently, mercifully. He closed his eyes and let his head fall into his hands. The world he had built of friends, Parties, ambitions, and noise now seemed hollow, like a drum that only echoed emptiness. His heart, once careless, now bled quietly beneath the weight of realization. A breeze slipped through the half-open window, fluttering the curtain, and then he heard it, a faint whisper. At first, he thought it was the wind. But then, it came again, low, tender, trembling. It wasn't sound, not really. It was memory made into voice. Ollie. He froze, his breath caught. It was her voice, his grandmother's same gentle tone that had called him countless times in childhood, when he'd been too lost in play to answer. Allie, Beta. Remember, love never dies. It just waits for hearts to listen. He looked up, tears spilling freely now. The moonlight fell across her photograph, illuminating her eyes, making them shimmer as if alive. For a fleeting moment, it felt as if she was there, watching, forgiving, blessing. He whispered through trembling lips, "Dottie, I'm listening now." The silence deepened again, but this time it felt softer, sacred. He sat there till dawn, holding her picture close to his heart, and for the first time in years, he prayed. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't need to. In his heart, he knew she had already given it. The night had not spoken to him. Love had. The morning came quietly, a pale dawn wrapped in mist. The world outside was still half asleep, but inside Ollie's heart, a storm had finally found calm. He walked slowly through the narrow path of the old graveyard, his hands trembling. A bouquet of white jasmine pressed against his chest, her favorite flowers. The dew clung to the blades of grass, each drop shimmering like a teardrop caught in sunlight. Birds began to stir in the trees above, singing softly, almost reverently, as if they too knew that someone had come to make peace with love once lost. Allie stopped when he reached the small marble gravestone, simple, unadorned, yet so achingly familiar. The name carved upon it made his chest tighten. Zainab Fatima, a soul of light, gone home. He knelt slowly, his knees pressing into the damp earth. His breath trembled. For a long while, he said nothing. Words felt too small, too fragile for what his heart carried. He placed the flowers gently on the grave and whispered, "Dottie, I came late, but I came." The wind brushed softly against his face, carrying with it the faint scent of jasmine. He closed his eyes, and for a heartbeat, it felt as if she was there beside him, smiling in that quiet, forgiving way. Tears rolled down his cheeks, but they were not the wild tears of regret anymore. They were tears of awakening, the kind that cleanse rather than wound. He spoke again, his voice low and trembling. "You gave me everything, and I thought I was too busy to notice. You prayed for me when I forgot how to pray for myself. And yet, you never stopped loving me, not even when I stopped deserving it." A single ray of sunlight broke through the gray clouds above, falling gently upon the gravestone. Allie lifted his head, watching it. The light shimmered across the engraved letters, and for an instant, it looked as though her name was glowing. He smiled faintly through his tears. "You're not gone, are you?" he whispered. "You just changed places. From my world to my heart." The breeze grew warmer, softer. It played with the corner of his shirt, like an invisible hand, her hand. Allie sat there for a long time, lost between silence and memory. He told her everything about his regrets, his sleepless nights, his longing, and when words finally failed, he simply stayed. As he rose to leave, he touched the gravestone once more. "I'll make you proud now," he murmured. "Not because I have to, but because I finally understand what love truly means." When he turned to go, the jasmine petals fluttered in the wind, circling gently, before resting again, as if bowing farewell. Behind him, the sunlight spilled over the earth like a quiet blessing. And in that moment, Ollie knew love had not ended in that grave. It had begun there. The sun had begun its slow descent, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. When Ollie returned home, the air was heavy with the fragrance of the earth. mixed with the faint scent of jasmine from the morning visit. His heart felt full, yet fragile, like a vessel that had been mended after a storm. For days, he had wandered through memories, tracing her life in the corners of the old house, in the folds of her letters, and in the soft lines of her photograph. Every object whispered a story, every shadow carried a lesson he had once ignored. And now, standing in the quiet of his room, Ali realized that the greatest gift she had left him was not the love he had taken for granted, but the courage to carry it forward. He opened the letter she had left behind, the one he had hesitated to read in part 5. The ink was faint, trembling like her hands had trembled while writing it. Yet the words struck him with the force of a lifetime of lessons. My child, love is patient, even when unreturned. It is silent, even when unacknowledged. If you ever feel lost, remember me not in sadness, but in every act of kindness that you perform in the world. Her words, written with the quiet strength of a woman who had given everything, were now a map for his life. Ali felt a warmth bloom inside him, a resolve that no wealth, no distraction, could ever replace. That evening, he went to the corner of the city where many children walked barefoot, their eyes bright with dreams yet to be realized. With the modest inheritance she had left, Ali decided to open a small learning center in her name. Not a grand monument, but a haven of knowledge and care, where children could find nourishment, education, and a love that mirrored what his grandmother had given him. As he placed the first desk inside the small room, Ali whispered softly, "This is for you. Dottie, your love will live here, in every word they read, in every lesson they learn." The walls, once bare and silent, now seemed to hum with life. The faint scent of jasmine lingered, as if she had walked with him, approving, smiling. The sunlight caught the edges of the window panes, scattering gold across the floor, a quiet reminder that love, even when it seems gone, never truly disappears. That night, Ali returned home and sat before her photograph once more. The image that had once been a passive memory now glowed with a presence he could feel in his chest. He pressed his hand to it, tears rolling freely, yet tempered with peace. "Dottie," he whispered, "I will remember. I will love, and I will live the way you taught me, quietly, patiently, and fully." The wind rose outside, stirring the curtains, carrying with it a faint echo of laughter, of whispered prayers, of the soft clink of her bangles. Ali closed his eyes, and for the first time in years, he felt her near, not as a shadow, not as a photograph, but as a presence in every heartbeat, every breath, every act of kindness he would carry forward. And in that sacred, quiet moment, he knew that love had not ended in loss. It had become a legacy.